even today, she is scared to death of German Shepherds. She's in her 90s, and whenever she sees a German Shepherd, she runs. So if, you think that it's like an in thing not to vote, fine. Don't vote, Carlos. Don't vote. But anybody with a face of color, you need to get your behind out there. I'm talking about African Americans. I'm not dealing with anybody else because we're not immigrants. We did not ask to come here. And we have to fight.
Ma'am, I hate to bring that up, but I did find it a little offensive.
Okay, yes.
I'm a little offended. Because I'm an immigrant doesn't mean that I'm not gonna vote. Obviously, I will vote for the interest of making sure that I'm also provided with a form of suffrage in this country. Because there's a lot of folks in this country who don't think that I should have a voice. If that were actually part of the issue, I would definitely vote. But I would not vote, for example, if it means that because I'm voting for a candidate, Wall Street's going to get more kickbacks, or because I'm voting for a candidate, some folks are not going to receive health care. That is not acceptable in my case. And I do find it a little offensive that that we have to provide some kind of division between all different minorities because we're not in the same struggle. We are in the same struggle. We are marginalized by communities, and we are marginalized by brutalities, and we are marginalized by a system that is inherently racist. But we can't perpetuate it, and we cannot form any more divisions between people who are inherently oppressed in the same form and junction.
Right.
Thank you so much, Carlos.
Yeah, and thank you for that too, Ms. Deborah. If anyone else wants to call in, number is 212-650-6903. I want to piggyback on what Carlos said because honestly, I'm also uncomfortable when it comes to like just making racial division in lines when it comes to people of color because I feel like when number one, especially when it comes to Black and Latinos and the Muslims and all these different people of color who are oppressed in our society, it may be in different ways, but it's still an oppression, and we're still the ones on the bottom of the totem pole together when it comes to, of course, when it comes to classism and economic inequality and instability. There are lines of color that keep us all down, and to divide them even more, I think, does not help the cause at all. So I say, I am an advocate for voting, and I say that all people of color especially need to vote. And I do understand what you were saying about making a strategic campaign not to vote. It's just don't vote. It's not like you're saying just don't vote. You're saying if it's a part of a stronger political cause, a campaign, in order to get someone in that you feel can represent your needs better.
Or at least form the grassroots to bring in a candidate that will be able to better serve as a community. Absolutely. Hash it out.
I think a great example of not voting is this last gubernatorial election where people either voted for Zephyr Teachout or they didn't vote for like the mayor slot at all because they wanted to express their disillusion with Governor Cuomo. Now, of course, Cuomo won the election, but he did it with, I think, about 54% of the vote, which is not a lot for someone running in a Democratic state.
And not somebody who wants to run for president.
Exactly. So what that did was send a message that people are not happy with you. And I think those are examples of like what you mean by abstaining to vote. I tend to side with people who say that a lot of us fought for the right to vote. And I'm talking about all people of color and disenfranchised people. So you never want to alienate that vote. And when you're voting, you have a voice to stand on, and I want to share one of those voices who's voting obviously and who's listening to the show right now. So we have Monique, and she's talking about what she wants from her elected officials and why she votes, and she's voting and she wants from her elected officials to make more of an effort to integrate young adults into their work through roundtables or auxiliary organizations and or initiatives that either create opportunities for generations coming behind them or, most importantly, gives them a voice and ownership over their experiences and contribution to their neighborhoods.
That's great.
And
that's
a really
great
good
response.
Point because for me, I love politics. I didn't really have a lot of experience working for campaigns when I graduated because I just didn't know where to go. And when I finished, I was way behind the spectrum.
But see, that's something that's missing in political discussions too. We don't have roundtables. We don't actually have a place where we can meet our elected officials because they don't want to become part of the community, and I think that's what's missing, and that's a fantastic point.
They don't have an incentive because people aren't voting. Celine, did you have something to say?
Yes. Really quickly, I wanted to say, I wanted to repeat what Bianca Marley tweeted us. She says what she wants as a millennial is retirement and Social Security. We work hard now, but what's going to happen in the future? And economic stability and our future as millennials is something that is definitely pressing on a lot of us when we see Social Security dwindling, and a lot of us are asking what pensions are almost non-existent in a lot of corporations and companies. And now it looks like we might not be able to rely on Social Security, or at least we'll have to work up until we're darn near 70 years old.
Well, quick thing, there's nothing wrong with Social Security. Social Security is pretty much good until 2033, and then it can still cover people at least 75% of what they're owed by 2046. At that point, by the time it gets to then, it would have replenished with people already contributing to Social Security. The only reason Social Security ever is brought up as an issue is because the government is owed Social Security money, because either they're not putting it in there or they get these tax cuts where they don't collect the Social Security money that they're supposed to replenish. So you don't have to worry about that. Exactly. Or they pay for wars. And I think what we need to take a step away from is falling into these talking points that elected officials give us. And that's why there's an argument that millennials are the most informed and most uninformed group in the last 100
simultaneously
years.
We defy the logics of of these few opinion polls. I love it.
But like right now, we've been talking about elected officials. We've been talking about whether you want to vote or not. We've been talking about what we want. Is there a candidate out there right now that you feel speaks for you? And if so, what are you doing to put them out there, Selena?
I wouldn't say there's necessarily like that one person that speaks for me. Necessary, and if they are, it wouldn't be someone that I could vote for because of where I live. But I will say that I do think that the Democratic Party itself is becoming progressively more progressive. I think that it's slow and gradual, but I do think that they are adhering to the needs of millennials, especially way more so than Republicans who are like falling off. And I do not see how they can ever make amends with young people, black people, Spanish people, or gay people.
Right. Well, you know, one of our people who posted, Derek, he mentions affordable housing and it made me think about Bill de Blasio. And he said, you know, he wants an elected official that's going to create affordable housing that's actually affordable and standardizing rent maximum based on economic variables in each neighborhood. Bill de Blasio has been doing a lot of work to make sure that happens. I got to give him props. Selena?
Really quickly, to piggyback off that, we have Ron Greasy who tweeted us and said he wants poverty and the economy, but also debt, globalization and the importance of education is a few of the things that he thinks should be prioritized when it comes to the political agenda.
All right, now, Carlos.
These responses are amazing. Who's an elective?
Millennials knows what they want, but like, who's an elected official that really, like, you feel like they have potential? I say Elizabeth Warren, but I want her to stay in the Senate.
You took the words out of my mouth. I think Elizabeth Warren, in my opinion, is one of the best candidates for any form of office, but I think she's constrained by being a Democrat. I really do. I think if she ever took a responsible role in making sure that she ran for elected office, she should do it as an independent to be able to triangulate against all the parties. She may not win, but it does move the conversation to a certain degree where at least you're providing an extra voice. But unfortunately, I guess my issue is, you know who I really would love to see? Somebody who's young, somebody from our neck of the woods, a millennial running for Congress. I would love to see that. I would love to see somebody who's 26 years old. That's usually like the drop on rate for Congress, or even for Senate's a little older, but I would love to see somebody from our age, from our neck of the woods, going into Congress and trying to apply his or her knowledge to what is going on in our neck of the woods.
Thank you so much for that, Carlos. And, you know, with you saying that, actually, it brings it perfectly into my closing statement. They say millennials are the most uninformed group and most informed at the same time. And at least the last 100 years, some people say that millennials are spoiled. Some people, not Ms. Deborah, say that millennials are lazy. Some people believe that we don't want to do anything about the system. And if you talk to millennials, you find a lot of people who are pessimistic and frustrated with the system that they don't think speaks for them, especially millennials of color who don't necessarily have a full voice out there. When the writer and creator of Girls is a representation of all women, even though she pretty much ignores the whole facet of women of color and speaks on issues like abortion and sexual harassment and just student loan debt without giving any voice to people who look like Selena or even who look like Patricia, as we know, Patricia, our old host, then we have a serious problem. But millennials, one of our biggest issues, and I'm going to go against the grain of what Carlos said, is the fact that we are not vocal enough in the polls because we are so disillusioned with the system.
We are not a monolith.
Exactly. But as My friends used to say to me back in the day, back in Brooklyn, don't hate the player, hate the game. And what we're doing right now is hating the player. We are hating all the players. We are hating all the people who put money into politics to get what they want. We are hating the elected officials who we thought were Superman and were going to save the world, Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, John Kerry, George Bush, et cetera, et cetera. And we are hating that the things are not working. We are hating all the players. And we are hating the game. But you know how you beat a game that is rigged with bad players? You learn the game and you beat them at it. And you do things like Carlos mentioned. We put people into office that look like us and have the same issues as us and who are in the same age range as us, and we vote for them.
And also who understand our community.
Yes,
it's primal.
Exactly.
They need to understand where they're coming from.
Understand our community. And we do what Selena says. We do not split up the differences, because at the end of the day, we are all facing some kind of injustice. It doesn't matter if it's not the exact same injustice. It is an injustice, and we have to stick together if we are ever going to see something happening. We, whether we like it or not, are the next future leaders of the free world. But we're not going to be too much better than the current leaders if we don't learn how to master this game. And once you master the game, you can destroy it from inside and put up a system that's a lot better. And if you don't want to do that and you want to be disillusioned and frustrated and sit back, you can keep on being ran by as all the players keep on playing and keep on winning, and you're sitting there hitting the game. It's your choice. But we'll be right back on Let Your Voice Be Heard, and when we do return, it'll be the News Roundup.
You make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven for too long. Yeah, you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven for too long. For too long. I've been locked out of
Whcr 90.3 FM, New York.
Driving has a rhythm all its own. Don't wreck it with a text. Before you get behind the wheel, silence your phone. Or better yet, designate a texter. For more text-free driving tips, visit stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
On the next episode of Recipes for Disaster.
So we've got our neighbor Paul coming over tonight for a barbecue, which is why I prepared a delicious lemon rosemary steak marinade from my special collection of old family recipes. To make sure the steaks are extra, extra, extra tender, I left them marinating out on the counter overnight, just like Nana used to.
Maria may mean well, but without food safety, it never ends well. Always thaw or marinate foods in the refrigerator at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, or you could make your friends and family really sick. Maria's neighbor Paul didn't think twice about the steak he ate until he was presenting his company's financial forecast to the board. That's when a sudden bout of food poisoning made it explicitly clear that profits weren't the only thing on the rise. Watch Recipes for Disaster at foodsafety.gov. You'll learn the right steps as Maria does everything wrong. Brought to you by the USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Living in a lonely world. She took the midnight train going
Oh, yeah. And we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard, only on 90.3 FM WHCR, the voice of Harlem. And what you just heard was Journey's Don't Stop Believing Dance Remix. And that joint was so
Dance
hot.
remix?
Oh my God, that drop, dude.
Yes, that drop was
Stanley's
all sorts of
favorite
good.
karaoke
My
song.
mind was blown.
You guys had too much fun.
Celine, you're a hater. You were in here having fun, too.
I was videotaping it. That's what I was doing, okay?
If I ever run for office, she's going to use that to blackmail me.
Probably.
I definitely
Yes.
will.
I'll be there too. Don't worry.
Guys, we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard on 90.3 FM WHCR, the voice of Harlem, and this is now the News Roundup. If you are confused as to what the News Roundup is, I will explain it very quickly. We talk about news. We let you know what happened, we laugh about it, we joke about it, and then you share your news with us. If you have a story that makes you mad, that makes you happy, that makes you cry, that made you flip a table, or just you thought was interesting to bring up, you call us and share it with us right now. And I'm going to start it off because I have the mic and I am the man.
Oh,
so
God.
that's how I'm going to roll.
Oh, God.
And, yeah, Carlos?
Actually, I have some breaking news.
Really?
Yeah, the Dallas Ebola patient is now in critical condition.
Ooh.
Oh, that's not breaking.
The
He's been
man?
critical since this morning.
Yeah, well, I.
Now that
well,
we're-
thanks for minimizing the criticalness of the news.
I
but
didn't know that, though.
I'm a criticizer. I'm the great criticizer.
you're a fantastic criticizer.
Yes.
But Thomas Eric Ducan is now in critical condition, according to information released Saturday afternoon by Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital Dallas, and actually took to his health took to the worst now. Unfortunately, Mr. Ducan may not make it.
So how did they save the other two doctors / humanitarians who are helping people with
It's really
in
hit or
Ebola?
miss with Ebola, honestly.
Right.
Sometimes you can save them, sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
And because there's not like a clear, this is absolutely the cure for Ebola. One of the biggest reasons people die of Ebola is just straight dehydration, because you're running from every orifice. You're crying, you're vomiting, you're crapping, you're sweating.
Yeah.
And no, it's
no,
really
it's
serious.
true. Your bowels turn into complete,
Yeah.
excuse my French, crap.
Wow.
Well,
like
that's
you're
what comes out of bowels.
Right.
Selena, are you confused? It's like,
no,
wait, what
hold on,
does
no
that mean?
visuals. No, I get it, but then again, I don't want to go too in detail.
Yeah.
But I mean, thank you for sharing that, Carlos, because a lot of people have been paying so much attention to Ebola and the scare of an outbreak here in U.S. soil. We know that the people that man was around have been quarantined, and they're still in quarantine. But to hear that he might die, he might be the first U.S. citizen, American, to die from it.
Let's hope that's not the case.
Oh, God.
But I will say that it's scary because, in my opinion, it could not have happened in a worse state.
Right. Texas.
This is a state that has progressively cut all its funding on healthcare. It's a state whose Congress people, whose representatives have advocated for even more cuts in social spending in public healthcare. And if you look into the actual amount of money that we put into health and services, it's in a downward trajectory.
Right.
I mean, during the shutdown and during the government shutdown, almost a third of it got completely cut.
That's how we're making Ebola now with the government shutdown.
I mean, we could blame Ebola on the government shutdown, definitely. I want to put some blame on someone.
Well, I have someone who actually wants to put some blame on someone as well.
Let's
for
do it.
Ebola. And when he finishes, I want to talk about Ebola and what people have been saying real quickly. But on the air right now, we have another great listener whose name I forgot to collect because I'm a horrible host. Selena looks mortified. Forgive me, and please introduce yourself. You are on Let Your Voice Be Heard.
Yes, I'm Gregory.
Oh, hey, Greg. I know who you were. I knew the whole time.
How you doing, Gregory?
But you know what? I want to stay out of this here, but, Upjohn is a pharmaceutical company that's based in Texas. They contributed $1.1 trillion to over there in Africa for some plan. And now it just so happened 2 years later, all of a sudden this year, Ebola is kicked up again, and this character comes from Liberia. He comes over to where? Texas. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but between Texas and Mexico, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's being kicked up right now, and this is a scary situation.
Well, Gregory, you have no reason to be afraid for a couple of things. Ebola is not a new virus. It is an old virus, and Ebola virus comes from doing a couple of things, which Selena mentioned in an Ebola virus segment we did a couple of weeks ago, or maybe months. Ebola comes from eating, as people call, bushmeat, monkeys or other animals you can find in a bush. It also comes with dealing improperly with dead bodies, which, as you know, in some countries or some certain areas in countries, like they don't necessarily have the proper materials to deal with dead bodies, and you can contract it from there, or also eating stool. So that's It's true. That's how you get the Ebola virus. Now, if you're worried about catching the Ebola virus in America, I'll ask you 2 questions. 1, has someone spit in your mouth? 2, have you been in like direct contact with someone's sweat or blood who had the Ebola virus? If no for both those questions, you do not have the Ebola virus. The Ebola virus is not created by the government. The Ebola virus is not from Mexico.
And it's not created by Bill Gates.
It's not created by Bill Gates. And the guy who came back from Liberia with the Ebola is a freaking jerk because he knew he was around people who had Ebola. And then he came back and it was still getting crazy.
No. I definitely want to respond to that because he went to the hospital telling them, number 1, I'm showing all the symptoms of Ebola. And number 2, I just came back from Liberia. And you know what happened when he told that nurse?
What?
Nothing. The nurse did not transmit that message. And so when he went to the missions room, they sent him home. 4 days later, he came back to the hospital in Texas, and he said, you know what? I still feel really, really sick. So, no, actually, he was sent in an ambulance because he couldn't drive himself. And that's when they finally diagnosed him. It took Texas, that hospital, 4 days to actually take action. That was a breach in that hospital.
Can I just say then that I apologize for being completely wrong and he's not a jerk. Texas is the jerk, but it's Texas.
Thank you.
It was the hospital. You can't even say, and the legislation and the government there are, they're definitely stepping in. But that hospital,
that's not a good thing.
It did not. Right. The thing is, the hospital did not meet its standards.
Right.
Why?
Texas? I don't know.
Well, speaking of stupid people in hospitals, a woman is suing a sperm bank because the sperm that they gave her actually belonged to a black person, and now she has a mixed race child.
I heard
that
about
baby is so
this.
pretty.
It is,
It's
but
a beautiful
listen,
baby.
no one wants any black in them unless it's through college with a condom on. That's the only time.
We get cut.
That wasn't even okay. It was mostly inappropriate.
This is gonna be our last show, everybody.
This is like, come on. Like black is like a phase you go through one semester in college. You went to that T.I. concert and you met Jerome, but you don't want to have a child.
So what happened was, before we get too racy, right. So the woman claims that the reason why she's suing is not because her child happens to be black, but she's saying she's suing because it was wrong. She requested a certain type of sperm for her baby, and they got it wrong.
Maybe maybe there was a surplus of a certain kind of sperm.
Did she say, I demand a white sperm? They're like, well, duh.
Hey, we're a little low on the white. We're low on the Caucasian. If you want, we have...
We got NBA. We got Jay-Z.
Right. I mean, I don't think they were categorizing black people as sperm like that, but they did mess up. I mean, again, another horrible mistake from a hospital. Well, from a medical unit. I'll say that. So I did want to bring it here. Speaking about mistakes... So the Secret Service has been making a lot lately, and they've been making a lot, but we just haven't been hearing about them until now. We know that the U.S. Secret Service former director, Julia Pearson, has officially stepped down, and Joseph Clancy has stepped in. But I want to say this. So we know that a man was able to jump over the White House fence and make it all the way into the East Room while carrying a knife. We know that Obama was in an elevator with a man who had a history of violence and he had a gun on him, and that nothing happened. When he was in the elevator with Obama, he was taking a video of Obama, and other people were like, stop, and he refused to oblige. He refused to comply, and then they found out that this man has a criminal history. So I wanted to add to those two things, which got this woman kicked out of her job. There was also a man who was pretending to be a congressperson, and he managed to slip past Secret Service and attend an event where Obama was speaking, actually while he was speaking.
And he got a selfie, too.
Really?
Yeah, no, he got a picture with the president.
Oh, and that's pretty cool, though. There was also the one where a sniper shot at a White House window, a window facing Malaya and Sasha Obama. They were in a room, and obviously they had bulletproof glass. So he shot 4 shots into the window, and Secret Service heard the gunshots and said, "Oh no, that's not coming towards us. Don't worry about that."
It's just traffic.
The guy then again jumped into his car and sped off.
Right.
And the only reason they found out that something went wrong was because he crashed his car and the police stopped him. And then when they looked in his car, he had a rifle. And when they ran a warrant, they found out that he had just been by the White House. And those gunshots you heard were actually there, and it was causing the White House. The White House did not know anything about this. This happened in 2011. They found out in 2012 when they realized that there was chipped glass inside of the White House from the bullet.
By the way, you know who I blame on this? And I think how they have a complete, massive stake of blame here. The mutants. You know, those X-Men, I'm telling you, sneaking into the White House and,
I was thinking that too.
Yeah. Nightcrawler, man. I mean, come on.
He kicked butt when he came into the White House. That was so cool. I'm not even gonna lie.
in the last movie.
That's not the last. That came out when we were in junior high school.
I was in 8th grade when that movie came out.
Yeah. Oh, sorry guys. I'm getting it mixed up.
No,
don't worry. But that was a great movie though.
It's a bit disturbing, but then again, there have been other cases of people. Like, I've never heard of this many breaches. The worst breach I ever heard before this was when that guy threw the shoe at President Bush, and Secret Service was there like, oh, snap. Just sipping their tea and watching. But for FDR, one of my favorite presidents, probably my favorite president of all time, he was watching a movie in the White House theater, and some random guy was in there with them watching the movie, and no one knew who he was. But I've never heard of at least 5 occasions where someone wanted to shoot the president in the face, and Secret Service was like, nah.
Well, some people are saying within the African-American community that the reason why you're seeing so many slip-ups is because the president is black. I'm not sure, it sounds like a conspiracy.
Right.
Not sure if there's, evidence.
Well,
but
this president has received more threats than any, sitting president.
He definitely has. And, it could be a coincidence, could be irony, or it could be something larger at hand. But I will say that there's the culture within the Secret Service drastically and desperately needs to change. I don't think that by just replacing Julia Pearson with Joseph Clancy is going to,
Tom Clancy?
I was thinking the same thing.
It's not going to make that much of a difference. I think that they need to definitely restructure and figure out what's going on within that whole operation.
It's really lax. One of the Secret Service agents was actually feeding information to the 2012 Romney campaign, telling the Romney campaign where the President Obama was. And then the Secret Service agent, whose name they didn't release, took one of Ronnie's aides on a joyride in the White House on a Secret Service car. Yes. And I forgot the name of the woman who was shot in the back of the head by Secret Service when she turned into the White House during the government shutdown. The reason she got past security was because 2 Secret Service officers were on the corner smoking cigarettes when they were supposed to be on duty.
I mean, how do they get if I did that with my job, it just wouldn't be there anymore.
I'm very proud that at least we didn't go in the route of the political. The Political came out with this disgusting article saying the only way that the Secret Service is going to learn is if the president gets shot.
Ooh.
And nobody wants that.
Right.
Nobody. You don't learn a single lesson if that were to unfortunately happen because, I mean. Okay, you need to reform the Secret Service. Not even reform. I hate using that term because it seems like such a placid term. But you need to make sure that everything becomes foolproof. You need to have effective management. And the lady that left the Secret Service, the last director of the Secret Service, wanted to turn the Secret Service into Disneyland. There was an Atlantic article about how her entire goal was to make sure that the Secret Service was friendly and nice and happy. No, they're not. They are basically the bodyguards for the president.
Right.
They're not supposed to be nice.
Yeah, and that's what I expect. I want to make sure that my president, I can feel assured and confident that our president is being taken care of at all times. But I will want to say this because I know we talked about Texas often, and we talked, pretty much why we don't like Texas. And I wanted to add on to why, if you are progressive and a woman and a millennial, you should. And in Texas, I definitely feel sorry for you. And we definitely need to do something. And the reason why Texas currently has only 8 abortion clinics at this time, and the reason why on Thursday night the federal appeals court, they reversed a decision that was keeping at least 13 other clinics open, and now they reversed it and they enforced a very strict abortion law that forced those 13 clinics to all shut down, and we only have 8 within Texas right now, which is of course forcing women who live in suburban areas to drive hundreds of miles just to get fair legal access to an abortion. And of course you have the evangelical right who was saying yes, now that we only have 8 clinics, these clinics are very safe, they're very secure, and it will make abortion so much easier. We're actually doing this for women's safety and women's health. And that's not going to happen because now with women who don't have access or a car or just can't afford to take off a day from work to drive 300 miles, what they're doing is they're going to turn to other self means to terminate a pregnancy.
Ugh.
And it's horrible.
and scary and dangerous.
It definitely is. It definitely is. So, and I definitely wanted to bring that up. And I know we spoke about this law earlier in this year. And, you know, this is actually the law that State Senator Wendy Davis was filibustering earlier this year. And look what happened. But hopefully, if she can, you know, become governor.
She won't.
But if she did, in an ideal world, maybe we'll have some reform in Texas. But until then, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we're coming back talking about the Hong Kong protests. Right here.
So exciting.
And Let Your Voice Be Heard.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
This is Maurice Watts, better known as The Voice, and your radio host of The Love Zone, reminding you that this Friday night, I need you to stop on by my place, The Love Zone, from 8 p.m. until the stroke of midnight, where you will hear some of the best R&B love songs of today and yesteryear. That's right, we take you from 1948 and bring you all the way up to the present, baby. Been serving you your love for over 22 long years, so hey, mark your calendar. This Friday at 8, you and I have a date. I'll see you there.
Shoot the lights out high till it's bright out. Oh, just another lonely night. Are you willing to sacrifice your life?
I'm a monster, no good blood sucker. Fat motherfucker, now look who's in trouble. As you run through my jungles, all you hear is rumbles. Kanye West samples, here's one for example.
Gossip, you can just stop it. Everybody know
I'm a motherfucker monster.
I'ma need to see up to your pants at the concert. I'ma need to see up to your pants at the concert. Profit.
And we are back. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard right here on
Selena,
WHCR.
calm down. The song was cleaned.
I really hope
I know
so.
it sounds really close, but when you do the reverse, so like when you're cleaning a song and they have a curse word in there and you're editing it, you can mute it or you can reverse it. So I reversed it this time.
Instead of muting, right.
Yes.
I hope that we can explain that to the FCC if need be.
Well, no, that's how they do it on Hot 97 too. It's okay.
Well, we're not Hot 97.
No, you're right. We are cold Harlem.
Right. But we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard right here on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Again, my name is Selena Hill. We have Stan the Man on the PC 1s and 2s and Carlos.
Taking selfies.
Yes, taking selfies right now. So speaking about selfies and speaking about pictures, we're actually going to take the conversation all the way across overseas to China and Hong Kong particularly. I've been paying a lot of attention to this, and if you're on Twitter, I'm pretty sure you've been seeing Hong Kong protests and Hong Kong being hashtagged and used, especially this week. And the reason why is because government officials that actually the Hong Kong protests have been going on for the last week. And what's happening is thousands of protesters, they began pouring into the streets of Hong Kong, and it started last Sunday to call for fair democratic elections after Beijing announced on August 31st that a plan to limit the committee that selects candidates to run in the upcoming 2017 Hong Kong election. As a result, Democratic candidates would be more than likely blocked from campaigning since all candidates must undergo a vetting process by the pro-Beijing committee. So what does this mean in like American terms? Like how would we No, I was just gonna say, so how can we relate? So pretend that, let's say like Mitt Romney's in office, right? Let's say that he actually won the election.
Boo.
And thank you for that. And let's just say he was like, you know what? Everyone has a right to vote in America, But all of the candidates are going to be vetted by a pro-Tea Party committee. They're going to be 1,200 people, and they're all going to be radical Tea Partiers or right-wing conservatives, and only those candidates that go through that committee and make it out will be the ones that you can vote for. You can still vote, but those are the people you have. Is that really suffrage? Is that really universal suffrage?
Not at
Is
all.
that really fair?
It's not democracy.
It's not. And you know what's happening? The millennials over there in Hong Kong are protesting. They are coming out in droves. This is a student-led protest. It started with a 17-year-old student, actually, and they are just making waves now across the globe. And that's why we're going to talk about this.
I do have some questions that I wanna ask about their platform and about where they're coming from, because maybe it's just the media, but it's not particularly clear. Also, what are what are their other goals? I mean, the democracy issue is a very important one in China. It's a very sensitive issue, and I think it's an issue that I think the whole world's watching, and I think they're going to win on that one. But what else do they want to bring into the table? And that's kind of what the conversation. That's the kind of conversation I want to have with a leader from Hong Kong.
Yes, definitely. And that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So, again, the critics are saying this vote, even though people in Hong Kong have the right to vote, this vote will be useless if all the candidates are handpicked by Beijing. And they're also saying that the Chinese government is encroaching on the affairs of Hong Kong too much, which, of course, in Hong Kong, we know is a semi-autonomous Chinese territory. And they're saying, you know what, you're getting in our business a little too much. We need you to back up. In response, the Chinese government has doubled down on their August 31st decision. And Hong Kong's chief executive, C.Y. Long, he has issued a warning that protesters have until Monday to retreat. They're saying, you know what, we're not going to do anything. You guys need to go home because you're blocking business owners from doing business, and you're also blocking government officials from getting into their buildings to do business.
Wait, their leader is Mayor Bloomberg? This sounds like Occupy.
Hey, I'm glad you brought that
ironic?
up.
So he's going to send the police to kill puppies and slap people in the face with nightsticks like Mayor Bloomberg did for Occupy?
There is police corruption, and we're going to talk about that there because there's a lot of protesters saying that the police are paying off criminal gangs to sort of fight back and to get into different tussles and in confrontation with the protesters to sort of, discourage them. And with that, so again, the government officials, they're demanding them to, stop the protesters, saying you cannot do this, it's illegal. And meanwhile, critics of the pro-democracy movement, which is called Occupy Central, which we mentioned earlier in the show. Right. It's such a great hashtag, Occupy Central. I just wanted to add that. But they're saying, other people are saying, you know what? We just don't like the fact that they're clogging our streets. And, we want operations to go smoothly and back to normal in our city. And we think that they should be able to negotiate. I don't know why they think that negotiations would prevail, but that's what they think. That's the way they see this should go down. They don't think that they should be creating all of this chaos, as they call it. So we have on the line with us a very special guest. His name is, I want to call him Professor. All right, I just don't want to just say Orville, but I can say Mr. Orville Schell. He is the Arthur Ross Director of the Center on U.S.-China Relations at Asia Society in New York. He is also the author of 15 books. His latest is Wealth and Power, China's Long March to the 21st Century. Hello, Mr. Orville.
Good morning.
Well, it's good morning for you, and it is good afternoon for us here in New York City. I believe you're calling in from California?
I am.
Is it sunny? Is it warm?
Very beautiful, rather frighteningly dry. There's a drought with us at the moment.
Right. Still no rain in California, or not enough?
Not enough.
Not enough, right. So drastic things happening in California and, of course, in Hong Kong. And I want to start here with the conversation because we've been hearing about the protests in Hong Kong. But before we get to that, can you explain the relationship between Hong Kong and China? From my understanding, Hong Kong was ruled by Great Britain for over 150 years, and then it was handed back to the Chinese in 1997. But Hong Kong is currently semi-autonomous, and it has its own set of rules. So can you explain?
Well, when Hong Kong was handed back by Great Britain to China, so China regained sovereignty, Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping struck a deal which in essence said that if Hong Kong would go back and Britain would agree, that it would have what he called one country, two systems. In other words, that Hong Kong could continue to have what he called a high degree of autonomy, and they could continue, free press, free assembly, freedom of religion, etc. And that is really what we're now arguing about and what the protesters are in the street about, that it was also agreed in 1997 that by 2017, the chief executive of the special administrative district would be elected by universal suffrage. And so that, as you described it, is the dilemma that brings all these students into the street, because the candidates that people will be able to elect are not freely chosen from among the electorate, but they're vetted by a group of carefully selected people that Beijing has approved. So all the candidates would have to, quote, love the motherland and be patriotic to China, so that means Beijing will not have to risk having someone with whom they disagree presiding over the city, which in a certain sense one can understand, but it isn't what was promised, and it isn't what most Hong Kong people, it turns out, would like to see happen.
Right, and it sounds like this is something that has built it up to this point, and that's why we see massive outcry in the streets of Hong Kong. But we see the government just pushing back. Do you think that this sort of means, and by going to this measure, the student-led protests and the protesters and people who are just calling for pro-democracy, do you think they'll be able to prevail and to win? Or do you think that the Chinese government is just gonna crack down?
Well, this is what we're looking at. Actually, in the next 48 hours, we could have a real dust-up, because the demonstrations now have continued for a week. And the Beijing government has said that they will not relent. They will not compromise. And the leader of China, the new Communist Party General Secretary and President Xi Jinping, has said and evinced a very strong, muscular leadership style over the last 2 years, that he's not going to retreat. So you have a choice. The students are in the street. There are tens of thousands of them, and I think in the next 24 hours or so, we're going to see another major confrontation with the police. They're going to try to clear the streets because they're blocking the central region of Hong Kong and Kowloon, and preventing people from going to work, and schools have been closed, and government offices have been closed. So there is a real confrontation brewing, and I don't foresee that the Hong Kong government, which really has to do the bidding of Beijing, is going to yield on anything of significance that would get the students out of the streets voluntarily.
So I'm trying to kind of clarify also, because it's not just students who are also protesting; it's also trade labor unions and workers who are taken to the streets too. What are some of the demands that those organizations are also trying to push forward? Because I kind of want to get a bit also perspective of once, if they get all of their demands kind of set out, what is one of the clear agendas that they want to try to advocate for? What if they succeed in implementing a fair democratic system?
Well, actually, their demands are quite simple. The main demand is that they want to have free elections for their chief executive of Hong Kong, and they want candidates to be able to be proposed by ordinary citizens rather than to be controlled at the top by Beijing's hand-picked committee. But then, as the demonstrations continued, there have been some other demands, namely that the present chief executive of Hong Kong, who was chosen by Beijing, resign. The demonstrators, and you're right, they do transcend students, although that's the majority of them, view him as very much the creature of Beijing and not independent to make his own decisions. So they want him to resign. They also want to talk with the government, but on the other hand, the chief executive won't talk to them, wants to fob them off on lower levels. So that's unacceptable. Other than that, there are not a huge amount of demands that they're lobbying for. They're not trying to overthrow the communist system in China. They're not proposing that Hong Kong be independent. They accept that it's a sovereign part of China. So the demands are pretty narrow, but from the perspective of Beijing, totally unacceptable.
Right. So what's the U.S. stance on all of this?
Well, the U.S. is, it understandably, we have to be able to deal with China. I mean, we have problems like climate change, the Ebola pandemic, you have nuclear proliferation, terrorism. I mean, you've got a whole host of new, really inescapable global issues. And the U.S. and China are the two major powers in the world now. So we have to have a working relationship with China. This has meant that the State Department and the President have been somewhat reluctant to sort of pile on and criticize China. We basically said we've hoped that they would have a more democratic form of governance and that there would be no violence, that they would settle this peacefully. But the truth is the United States doesn't have an awful lot of power here. We could take a very high visibility stance, but it wouldn't make a heck of a lot of difference. China is not right at this moment particularly suggestible by us, or I should say by Great Britain, which signed the deal with them. Although some members of Parliament, Chris Patten, the former British governor of Hong Kong until 1997, has now spoken out. But, we have to recognize our influence is limited.
It definitely is. And guys, if you're listening and you have a question or a comment about the Hong Kong protest, you can call us up. The number is 212-650-6903. You can also tweet us at BeHeard_radio. And I'm glad that you did bring up like the America's sort of reluctant and apprehensive stance towards getting involved in China. I know that we did send Security Advisor Susan Rice. She was in Beijing and she called for restraint and for the protection of political ideals. Do you think that that happened just to sort of save face, or do you think that they might maybe be pushing for something a little stronger, or maybe even backing the protesters in any way?
Well, I think it goes without saying that Susan Rice and the National Security Council and the White House is for democracy, and so is John Kerry, and so is President Obama, and they can say this in a kind of a nice general way. But when you get right down to it, they could even come out in support of the students. That would just antagonize China, but wouldn't really help the students, wouldn't help anybody. So we're in a bit of a dilemma that Obama is going to Beijing in November to talk with President Xi, and then we do need to have a working relationship. So what do? China has sort of put everyone in a rather difficult position that if you say too much about something like this, it influences your ability then to work with China and other very critical issues.
Speaking of the president of China, Xi Jinping, what is this a challenge also towards him and his very nascent leadership in Chinese politics? Do you think this is going to affect the way that he effectively runs the Communist Party over there?
Well, I think it is a huge challenge. I mean, you have to remember that the last time we saw demonstrations like this in a Chinese city was 1989 in Beijing.
Right.
And that was a tremendous embarrassment and humiliation. It would be in any country when you have a million people in the middle of the middle of the middle of the country in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. So here we now have, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people flooding into the central part of Hong Kong, the most iconic, symbolic part of Hong Kong, basically defying the authority of the Chinese Communist Party and Xi himself. So this is we are in really sensitive territory here, and we should make no mistake about it, and the students actually should make no mistake about it, because we know what happens when authority in China is defied. We've seen it on June 4th, 1989 in Beijing, where hundreds, thousands were killed and wounded. So I hope this doesn't happen in China and Hong Kong. Everybody does. And it would be a terrible blow for President Xi, for China, for the world, indeed. But, if you're not going to be able to make concessions and accommodations and horse trade a bit to get peace, you're bound to end up with some kind of a confrontation, and I'm afraid we're heading in that direction.
Yes, and again, we commend all of the millennials and the student-led protesters there who are putting almost their lives on the line. It can get really nasty. It can get really ugly. It's already progressing to become very aggressive and very violent. And we just hope, like Professor just said, that it doesn't escalate too much. But we do have to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to continue this conversation about Occupy Hong Kong, Occupy Central, and the Hong Kong protests right here on Let Your Voice Be Heard.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Back door cracked, we don't need a key. We get in for free, no VIP sleeves. Drink that Kool-Aid.
Hi, this is Sister Virginia Cotton, and I'll take you to that place every Tuesday morning from 6 to 10 in the a.m. on the Gospel Legends program. We'll lift the Savior and take a trip down memory lane. How far back will I go? Tune in on Tuesday morning, WHCR 90.3 FM from 6 to 10 in the a.m. And don't forget the website. That's the 3Ws.WHCR.org. I'm so excited.
Because you know I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no trouble.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
I'm all about that bass, bass. Yeah, it's pretty clear. I ain't no size 2, but I can shake it like I'm supposed to do. 'Cause I got that boom, boom.
I got that bam, bam, boom.
Do you?
We are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard on 90.3 FM WHCR, the voice of Harlem. And I am the best looking man in the studio,
Oh,
second
God.
to only Carlos, who is dreamy as ever today.
And that's the only other man here.
Whoa, I will stone cold stun you, Selena.
No, you won't.
Oh, you're right, I won't.
So we are back. Thank you for that introduction. That derailed us a little bit, Stanley, but it's okay. We have on the line with us Orville Schell. He is the Arthur Ross Director of the Center on U.S.-China Relations at Asia Society in New York, and we're talking about the Hong Kong protests. I've seen so many pictures about what these mostly students are doing. They are fighting for democracy day in and day out. They are sleeping on the streets of Hong Kong saying that, you know what, if we cannot have universal suffrage, we won't take anything. We need full democracy in the next election.
They are going to be destroyed.
This is the largest.
No.
This is the largest protest since '89. I love the fact that Professor Schell brought that up because it is that important right now. It is the largest mobilized protest that China has seen in at least 2 decades.
If you think Mayor Bloomberg is bad and he had no cares to give, wait till you see how their government responds, because they have no dams to give.
And I have
none.
And I have a question to Professor Schell about this too. Do you think that President Xi learned from the '89 protests, and do you think that his response towards maybe even forming concessions to these protesters will come from what he learned about the reaction of the Chinese government in '89?
Well, I think, sadly, what the lesson that they took from 1989, as you remember, and then the demonstrations went on for 7 weeks. And they sent the Chinese People's Liberation Army in once towards the end of May in '89, and they were surrounded by the demonstrators and sort of neutralized and brought to a complete stop.
Right,
And
that's
then
the
they had to
anaconda strategy, from what I hear.
Yeah, it was really a kind of a people's revolution. So then they sent in whole new divisions of combat-ready troops, and when they met resistance, they shot their way into Tiananmen Square. So the lesson that the Chinese Communist Party learned, I think, in 1989 was don't let these things drag on week after week. Nip them in the bud early, and you will have a much better outcome. So I think that's where we are probably headed in Hong Kong, and what we sort of were hoping or waiting to see whether President Xi would, despite his sort of hard-line persona to date and other policy decisions, whether he might think, well, Hong Kong is different. Maybe we ought to take a somewhat more accommodating posture in order to make things work out. It doesn't look like that's what's going to happen. And that is, I think, bodes poorly for a peaceful resolution.
That's very unfortunate.
Yes, it is. And we actually have a very special guest on the line. She just called in. We have Claudia Mo, who is a Hong Kong legislator and the Civic Party founding member. She has been on the front lines in the Hong Kong protest. She is calling in from Hong Kong right now. Thank you so much, Claudia. Do we have Claudia on the line, Stanley? Thank you so much.
I'm here. Hello.
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 Yes. Thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you so much for calling in. It's very late in China. I want to say it should be 12:35 a.m. there.
See, I'm
So-
already too
That's
sleeping,
right.
too drunk sometimes.
I know. Thank you for staying out for us, Ms. Claudia. And, so I've been reading a lot from reports. There have been a lot of protesters accusing the government of paying off criminal gangs to break up the pro-democracy protests. I want to ask you, because you're on the front lines, is this happening, and what are the conditions on the ground like right now?
Well, the government thought they could scare people away, especially the young students, by partnering up with the triads, the mobs, the gangsters, the thugs in Hong Kong. But that actually had the opposite effect. I was down in that particular area where thugs were going wildly about the day before, and the young people were telling me they're not succumbing to that sort of violence, that sort of gangster brutality. So they were staying on yesterday. And today, even though some students decided to quit the area and move on to Admiralty, where the major news is that's very near Hong Kong CBD on the island side, right? Still, as far as I know, as of now, up to 600 people are still in that area where the triads, the gangsters, were displaying their force, sort of. So Hong Kong people do not succumb to violence and brutality easily. It actually had the opposite effect as far as yesterday is concerned, and that impression will carry on. I'm afraid the Hong Kong police's a rather good image has gone downhill. It would take a long, long time for it to climb back, if it does ever, because Hong Kong was considered to be one of the safest large cities in the world, right? But this time, they really had, the police force here had a lot to explain, and the government would have a lot to explain to the people.
Right. Claudia, do you believe that leadership in Beijing will employ lethal force? Do you think that's the next step here?
At the moment, I would say very unlikely. I know everyone's comparing what's happening in Hong Kong to the scenes at Tiananmen Square 25 years ago. I was there. I was there anyway, generally speaking, right? But we're talking about 25 years ago, and it's a quarter of a century. This time, I think they're playing safe, especially understanding that there's online journalism flourishing a lot in Hong Kong. The social media, Facebook in particular, is very popular with Hong Kongers. So I think they're playing safe because they do care about the international image, Beijing, those in power in Beijing, and they do care what outsiders would say about the supposed phenomenon of China rises, right? So I think they're playing careful. Although having said that, I think that the Beijing leaders are still very insecure and paranoid about Hong Kong, because outsiders may not remember Hong Kong was the subversive base for Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who started the revolution that overthrew the last Chinese dynasty, which was the Qing dynasty.
Right. Well, there's the whole world is watching. The whole world is putting a focus on Hong Kong, and
this is international news item number one. I understand. Yeah.
And that phrase comes back from the Occupy movement too. And I see that there is a huge inspiration from the kind of tactics that Occupy enacted in 2011 that are kind of going down in Hong Kong. So I just want to kind of get a little bit more of a feedback about what kind of, social activity, and also what the effect has been in social media in Hong Kong, and the guerrilla style of protesting that I'm seeing employed in this time day and age.
Now, Occupy Central, the idea of, was raised more than 1.5 years ago here, and people were looking forward to the happening. Then it's kind of dragged on a bit. But you don't blame the initiators, because we're talking about civil disobedience, and with civil disobedience, you would need to have exhausted all channels of sort of addressing the problem of trying to negotiate, blah, blah, right? So you can't start Occupy Central very easily. And when they actually tried to, it became irrelevant, because the students, the young students, mainly university ones, became so impatient. They started their class boycotts, and quite a few teachers have also started. They actually decided to go on strike. Right? I teach too, journalism and politics and media, etc. at local universities. I'm on strike at the moment. So, and then more and more people started to occupy this particular spot, that particular spot. In the end, Occupy Central didn't quite happen. But the other sort of occupation, as we would call it, movements, plural, because 3 sites at the moment got occupied. It was widely spread by a Facebook in Hong Kong. And we have very successful online websites, journalistic websites, rather like sort of Huffington Post kind of online websites that would really prompt many people to further, deeper understand what's happening, what's going on.
Right. If you're just tuning in, we have on the line with us Claudia Mo. She is a Hong Kong legislator and also the founding member of the Civic Party. She's calling in from Hong Kong. She's on the front lines. And we also have on the line with us Whcr, who is, again, the Arthur Ross director of the Center on U.S.-China Relations at Asia Society. Thank you so much, Professor Shell, for staying on the line with us. And I have, we do have to wrap this up, but I have one final question for you both. And I want to throw it first at you, Professor Shell. Is there hope that negotiation between the Hong Kong government and the protesters will lead to any type of compromise? And if the answer is no, and if they're just being idealistic, what should they do for democracy?
Well, I think there is some chance. The problem is that the Hong Kong government itself and the chief executive officer doesn't really have the power to make the kind of concessions that I think the protests are asking for. That decision-making power resides in Beijing. So unless Beijing is willing to compromise, I think discussions and negotiations with the Hong Kong local government really can't produce the kind of results that are needed. And since they've already said now that they intend to end the demonstrations by Monday so people can go back to work, this is quite a challenge, and in my experience, the Chinese government in Beijing does not make these kinds of statements if they don't intend to follow through on them. So that's why I think that we may see, something is going to happen here in the next day or so, and I don't see a very plausible, exit from what is a pretty rigidly irreconcilable contradiction.
Right. And Claudia, can you add on to that about resolution and the end game?
Yeah, I quite agree with what the professor had said just now. The Hong Kong government, headed by this C.Y. Leung, thinks this C.Y. Leung person thinks he's some sort of puppet from Beijing, which can pull its own strings. He is a puppet, all right, but the strings are all pulled by Beijing. And I understand students actually just had some 11th hour talk with the local administration, and it was in a deadlock, as expected. Because we're talking about basic principles. Hong Kong people would need to have some truly genuine democratic election method and framework, and not talking about some details that could be that could be conceded somehow. And if we, instead of some 50% threshold, let's lower it to 30. How about that? That's not it. We're talking about some basic principles here, and that is Beijing's made it very clear. Any candidate who would want to run for the leadership post in Hong Kong would need to be patriotic, i.e. loving the mother country, i.e. loving the Chinese Communist Party, because in China you only have one party rule, and that's unacceptable to Hong Kong to start with.
It definitely is, and thank you so much again, for Claudia, for calling in and for your activism in Hong Kong. We appreciate that. And also, Whcr, thank you for calling in and being our guest. And again, you can learn more about China. He has a book out. It's Wealth and Power, China's Long March to the 21st Century.
Thank you so much, you guys. That was amazing.
It definitely was. Great conversation here. And I just want to end this and get our final closing thoughts. Stanley, Carlos, I know that you were listening for the most part. What were any closing statements, Carlos?
I think that, the path to progress and democracy is paved in tragedy and struggle. And it's good to learn from the history of struggle to reach new concessions and reach to the great promise of greater enfranchisement and greater democracy. And I think the students in Hong Kong are leading the next generation of the struggle. They're leading on the next wave of empowerment for their people and their community, and that's a lesson we should be taking here in America. We should take the lesson to empower our communities to struggle and to reach greater solidarity with one another despite our differences, to make a much better world and a much more effective democracy, or at least create the democracy we want to emphasize on.
To be honest, I think that these protesters are going to lose, and they're going to lose very badly. And that would be something you should be disappointed about, but I think it's a good thing. And it's a good thing because even though they're going to lose, and they may lose very badly and even very brutally, they're not afraid to fight. They're not afraid to stand up. And I think, and I'm sure of that, no matter what kind of government you are under, you have to have a people who are not afraid to stand up when they believe something is being done wrong. And you know what? They have some narrow demands, and they're not asking for a lot, and they probably won't get it. But the fact remains, they're standing up. They're being active. They're being vocal. And a group that is being vocal and is not afraid to ask for what they want or even demand it is a group that should be okay when it's their turn to lead their country.
Definitely, and I'm a little more optimistic than that. I don't think that this is just, it's going to just end fatally for them. I don't think that. But I will say this, and to further emphasize on what these people are doing. These are young, energized students leading a massive protest that is getting global international attention and coverage, and it's all for democracy. Again, we started the show off talking about millennials and what we want and a political agenda, and here you have millennials across the nation who took a page out of the Occupy book, out of that whole outline and agenda, and they're doing it for themselves, and they are making waves, huge splashes. This is something that will go down in the history books.
I mean, we do impact internationally. Occupy went international, and that's beautiful. It is beautiful that we have among a foundation community a shared struggle and a shared solidarity between people who do want to make their country a little bit better and a little bit more fair.
Definitely. And on that note, we do have to close out. We're going to take a quick break, but we're coming back to the quickie to find out what Trumps want when it comes to marijuana. State law or federal law? Right here on Let Your Voice Be Heard.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
You're not going to hear the song because we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard on 90.3 FM WHCR, the voice of Harlem.
Hey, Stanley.
Hey, Carlos.
Let's talk weed.
Let's talk weed?
Let's talk weed.
We can talk weed.
We can talk weed, but here in New York City, we cannot do anything else with weed.
That is not that true, Selena. But we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard, and you know where we're from, and you know what we do. So I'll just tell you what's happening right now. This is the Quickie, and we are talking about marijuana laws in Colorado, state versus federal laws. Here is the rundown. There's a young man in Colorado who's a quadriplegic, so he has more than one body part, which he does no longer have. So we'll say 2 legs. Selena?
His legs do function, but because his spinal cord is no longer working, he doesn't get the signal, so he can't move his working legs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Selena, for clarifying that for me. Look at this. I'm already messing up the Quickie. He's quadriplegic.
Alyssa, where are you?
his spinal cord is screwed up. So he, in order to help to alleviate some of the pain that he gets in spasms, he has been approved to use medical marijuana. So this young man works for Dish Network, and they did a random drug test. He informed his supervisor that he uses medical marijuana so that he will more than likely fail this random test. And what happened? He failed the test. And once he failed the test, his company let him go from his job because he was using marijuana. And obviously we know by federal law, marijuana is still illegal. So what did he do? He filed suit claiming that he should not have to lose his job because by state law it is okay, medical marijuana is okay, as well as legal marijuana. And his company, Dish Network, said that even though it's okay in the state, it is not okay federally still, which is still a problem because in all of the U.S. right now, we'll say in Colorado in particular, where marijuana is legal, there are a lot of companies who distribute marijuana who could not put their money in their banks because marijuana was still considered a federal crime. So now what's happening over here is this young man who was doing something that's totally legal in the state is getting in trouble for it because federally it is not okay. It has been into 2 courts now, and the argument has been that he should not be penalized for something that's legal in the state, even though it's not okay federally. And both courts have ruled in favor of Dish Network, saying that federal law supersedes state law. However, because we know the landscape of marijuana legalization is changing dramatically and that we will soon see several other states legalizing marijuana, and we also know that the Department of Justice has begun to make moves to lessen the load of punishment for marijuana and also make it easier for people who live in states where marijuana is legal to do their thing. It could be changing what's going to happen with him. So now this case is going further up. It's going to an appeals court now, and the decision could change how we perceive. Yes, Lena?
Yeah, it's being heard by the Colorado Supreme Court.
Yeah, it was already decided over there. Yeah.
No, currently.
Yeah. It was decided. It was decided that the federal law supersedes state law. Yes, twice in 2 different places, Colorado Supreme Court. So it was already decided there. So.
And you're saying it's not there now?
Yeah, he's trying to appeal it again to go to appeals court now.
Okay.
Yes. Anyway, so what he's trying to do is show that obviously if it's a state law, then he should not be liable for what the federal law says. If it goes to the Supreme Court, what we could be seeing is a decision that would affect all legal marijuana smokers in states where marijuana is legal. If the Supreme Court decides that, hey, he's right, it's legal in the states and he should be fine, they'd pretty much be saying that state law and this situation could possibly supersede federal law. What his lawyer is asking is that they have a very narrow decision in which they allow him, because of his situation of needing medical marijuana and his back pains and sicknesses, to be forgiven and not charged with these things. So that's what's happening right now in Colorado. It's going to be very exciting to see where this goes forward from here. If you have any questions, call Selena.
No, I was going to say it's definitely setting a nationwide precedence here because for the first time, again, like Stanley mentioned, weed is legal. Both recreational weed and medical marijuana is legal in the state of Colorado. But apparently, a employer can still fire you from it for smoking or using it. So, I mean, it's about time we get the federal government to step in to either overturn it or to give some type of structure because we can't have this across the nation.
Well, the federal government isn't really stepping in right now. It looks like they're leaving it to the courts.
Right.
And if the courts keep deciding the way they have been, he's going to lose his battle because they have decided in favor of the federal government.
It's a little more complicated than that because this court specifically, if it goes to the Supreme Court, it has been very adamant in trying to empower state governments, and the actual slippery slope that this could implement is an interesting conversation, and it's also an interesting question. If you begin to empower the state governments above federal governments, what else can you say about the kind of laws that state governments also function in?
Exactly, and that's why I'm saying that he's more than likely going to lose because that and because
Not
of
necessarily.
Because unless it's a very narrow decision, what you're pretty much saying is that state law supersedes federal law, which throws in that whole conundrum you just mentioned. So it would have to be a very narrow ruling that says, like, if it's medically approved or however the Supreme Court would do it, then it is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Supreme Court, more than likely, to avoid going to all that trouble, is either going to punt it back or just go with what everyone else has done and stick with precedents because they're going to say federal law supersedes state law, which is just a common thing that we know at the moment now anyway. So if there's too much to lose to reverse the decision, and there's no stress at all to just stick with what everyone's saying and then put the onus on the federal government to change the laws.
And what are you saying, Carlos?
All I'm saying is that it could be if it goes to Supreme Court, there are many ways that the justices can navigate the situation. They can, in one way, say, well, marijuana as a state regulation, it should be upholded because it also supersedes on this patient's ability to even function, and he should be able to receive the medication because if he doesn't, it will affect the way that he's actually, functioning his work, and that could also, re-regulate certain injustices in the labor workforce. The problem kind of comes down to the actual substance, and under federal law, marijuana is still an illegal controlled substance, and that is one area where the conundrum actually starts. It's not really about state law; it's about superseding actual drug law. Should we get rid of should we start to get rid of our drug laws, or should we start categorizing certain drugs as as controlled or much more I guess maybe much more regulated?
And that's why the Supreme Court would punt it or stand with the decision.
Right.
Because the federal law is a bigger issue. But guys, I do have to get out of here. I'm going to leave you with one more song that's going to help you dip into your ratchet
Hope
self
it's
on this Sunday.
Beyonce.
It is absolutely not Beyonce, but Selena will be happy because he's the chief of something.
Oh, God.
Peace.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Ladies, does your man play Xbox all the time? Does he spend more on his rims than he does on his dental care? And does he call himself a grown man and wear saggy pants? Well, therein lies your problem. So I do recommend that you listen to
Good evening, everybody. My name is Maurice Selby.
And this is Sean Shivers.
Let's heal together by tuning into our show, Health in Harlem, every Thursday night at 7 p.m., where we interview healthcare professionals who will give you free medical advice.
Yes, that's free medical advice. We will discuss various ailments that affect your quality of life.
We will show you how you can afford to get treatment without emptying your pocket.
And I guarantee you will have learned something by the end of the show.
Armed with this life-saving information, all we ask is that you share it with friends and family.
That's Health in Harlem every Thursday night at 7 p.m. on WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
The voice of Harlem.
The voice of Harlem.
Greetings, this is Honey from Harlem 411. Tune in to Harlem 411 Friday nights at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. for information on health, education, housing, community events, and more. Harlem 411 serves information to you with the opportunity to call in with your questions. Harlem 411, produced to serve the community's needs. Let us serve you with information. Friday night, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Harlem 411.
You and your family are connected by routine, and you stick to it. But what if a disaster strikes without warning? What if your day's routine is disrupted and you can't reach your family? Have you planned for that? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, be ready. Get a kit. Make a plan. Be informed. Learn how at www.ready.gov. Brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Ad Council.
The odds of becoming a signed artist and having 3 #1 albums? 1 in 100 million. The odds of going on to win 6 Grammy Awards? 1 in 1.4 million. The odds of this performer having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 88. I'm Toni Braxton, and I encourage you to learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs. Autism Speaks. It's time to listen. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
The Stanley Mirsky MD Educational Unit of the Mount Sinai Diabetes Center presents free diabetes education classes. Learn how to manage your diabetes and enjoy a better quality of life. Invite your friends and family to help you reach your goals. Prevent, control, thrive. Classes are Monday evenings at 6 p.m. and Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m. All classes are held at the CAM building, located at 17 East 102nd Street, between Madison and 5th Avenue. Classes are free, but you must register. To register, call 212-241-3422, option number 4.
WHCR, New York, 90.3 FM.
It was not the Pharisees. It was not the Sadducees. But it was one of the disciples by the name of Judas. Judas turned around now and rebukes this woman. He wants to know.
Starting things off just a little bit different this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.